All right, guys. Super excited to have Keith Levinson on the call. He's a physical therapist of 14 years. He did the upper extremity fellowship program at Ohio State. And importantly, he worked with the Cleveland Guardians at the AAA level, specializing in shoulder and elbow injuries, a rehab specialist. He deals with overhead athletes, of all sorts. So this is, really important in the middle of this arm injury epidemic. And so, Keith, just introduce yourself and anything you'd like to talk about while we're dealing with this big arm injury epidemic and how we can avoid it.
Joe, thanks for having me on the page. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so my name is Keith, like Joe had mentioned. I'm a physical therapist for 14 years, and I had the privilege and the pleasure, great opportunity to work in professional baseball for a season. I did a upper extremity fellowship program through Ohio State's University, and I was actually able to work with the Cleveland Guardians for a season, predominantly at the AAA level. So I got some really valuable experience and knowledge working at the clinic in Ohio State with youth athletes around the Columbus, Ohio area. Some semi-pro guys, pro guys who come in the off season, coming into the Ohio State Clinic, and then obviously working at the ballpark each week with the pro guys at the MLB level. So a lot of valuable information, a lot of valuable experience that I gathered, and I'm still continuing that tradition right now. Still working with a lot of pro athletes and some youth athletes around the Long Island area where I live and reside, and helping out with our sports medicine program here. So thanks for having me aboard.
Absolutely. And I gotta say, man, I'm honored to have someone of your caliber, on the page and talking about this. This is something so important. I'm working with so many athletes and they are, so many guys, it's literally crazy, are coming to me and they have elbow issues, they have shoulder issues, and, they're trying to navigate the career of baseball. And obviously it's an overhead throwing, sport. And they want to have an incredible career. They want to have a long career. They want to get to the highest level they can. But the way baseball is right now, kind of the incentive structure, throwing max effort. We've seen an insane epidemic of injuries. Something like 34%, over a third of major league pitchers have had Tommy John surgery. It's been crazy. I live LA area, and so the Dodgers are my team, and it's like every single pitcher practically is coming down with some kind of elbow or shoulder injury. And so a lot of us are trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve this problem? And so that's what we're going to try to figure out. So kind of walk me through, for a young athlete, what are the risks of, pitching, and what are some ways that we can think about it to try to avoid those injuries?
Yeah, before I get into that, I actually have some really interesting statistics here that I'm going to pull up. The overuse epidemic, I think you hit the nail on the head here. I have some alarming statistics I actually want to share as well. 74% of overhead athletes, youth athletes aged 8 to 18 report arm pain when throwing. This was a study done in 2019 that I'm going off of here. 45% of pitchers under the age of 12 have chronic elbow pain. 58% of pitchers at the high school level have chronic elbow pain, and 23% of pitchers report injury history from overuse. So there's definitely a big epidemic that we're experiencing right now, that we're going through, and it's unfortunate. And the numbers are continuing to keep rising. The subjective intake and history of people complaining about shoulder and elbow pain, and the amount of athletes going on the DL and experiencing that time lost in baseball, having season-ending surgery. It's a major issue that we're experiencing right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely insane. I mean that's even worse than I was thinking, honestly. And I'm getting, talking to people all the time. And it's something that, yeah, we've got to address it. We've got to honestly raise consciousness about it. I think that's, one of the biggest things we can do. And if we can raise consciousness, that'll help. And then we can try to figure out, exactly what's going on. And so, one of the things that I do is I'm trying to, help with clean mechanics, not pursuing velocity, especially at a young age. And that's why we, teach the knuckleball to less, it's not a max effort pitch. And so, in your opinion, having worked professionally with pitchers and just like really inside of what's happening, what is the leading cause of this epidemic that has just gone out of control, especially in the last, 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors. There's tons of variables that kind of go into this, but the one thing that I can think of off the top of my head, and we were just talking about this, is specialization
Mhm.
of a specific sport. We're seeing more and more athletes kind of pick a sport early on in their career and trying to develop that niche, I guess, if you will, at a very young age. And I've seen too many issues at a young age, starting at like 8, 9, 10 years old, playing baseball and only baseball and throwing throughout the entire course of a season or a year. That's how these things start to kind of transcend, and you start to see like the unraveling of the body breaking down, and injuries starting to kind of compile and pile up. So I would say I wouldn't say the main, but one of the main issues that we're seeing is sports specialization at an extremely young age.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's
And
what
that,
I see for sure, like with, I'm in baseball, and so you see basically at the age of like 7 or 8 or sometimes even younger, is people get caught up in like, Perfect Game, and there's other big baseball organizations where they're ranking 8-year-olds based on how hard they're throwing. And so from a young age, they feel like they've got to keep up with like the top kids in the country. And,
Hmm.
I've read that a lot of the injuries that happen when you're, in high school, college, or even pro can be traced back to, all of the wear and tear that you're having when you're younger, when you should be maybe playing another sport or maybe just working on your mechanics, and just kind of having a less strenuous workload. Could you speak to that? Like, I guess like for a younger guy, like say before puberty, under 14, what would be like a way of kind of like approaching pitching to kind of avoid these injuries that are really like affecting guys?
Yeah, I mean, I have young kids who come into the office, and it's alarming when they tell me all I do is play baseball.
Yeah.
So I ask them, do you play any other sports? Do you play soccer? Do you play football? Are you on the swimming team? Um, do you ride BMX? I mean, you're out playing manhunt, and are you just being a kid? And then sometimes, most of the time, the answer I get is no, because these kids are at travel baseball, they're at school ball, they're playing summer ball, spring ball, winter ball, fall ball. They're playing all year round, and they're not really divulging and getting into other sorts of movement patterns and other sorts of sports, I guess, if you will, that kind of helps develop their neuromuscular system in a sense where they can learn how to be challenged in other ways where they're not going through the same repetitive motions over and over and over again. So to kind of go back again to the specialization of sport, to me, I think that's one of the main issues that we're kind of experiencing at a younger youth age. At a younger youth age.
Yeah. At what age would you think it's like it makes sense to specialize?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the maturity level of the kid. I mean, all these kids are growing at different rates. I mean, I have kids in 12th grade who look like they're in eighth grade. I have kids in eighth grade who look like they're in college, right? So I guess it all depends on the kid. But I guess if I had to put like a specific number on it, I mean, maybe 17, 18 is probably when you can start specializing more in a sport. That's what I would do at least. I mean, you see a lot of multi-sport athletes in college, right? A lot of these guys who come out of college and make it to the MLB or NFL, they were multi-sport athletes in college. They
Mhm.
played a fall sport. Maybe they ran track. Maybe they did a winter sport, depending on like what their primary sport is. I know a lot of NFL guys run track in the spring, and they're on NFL the college football team in the fall. So I guess it depends on the player, but if I had to pick a number, maybe 17, 18, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I'm like, curious, like in your practice, your overhead athletes, like, give me an idea of like kind of the age, what kind of sports people are playing, and just kind of like the reason for the injuries that you're seeing.
Well, like I said, there's layers to this stuff. There's a lot of sub layers. It's almost like an onion. You got to kind of peel it away and get to the core, find out like where the main issue is. But sports specialization is one of them. Sports specialization. The other thing I see is you don't really see a lot of kids on good foundational, fundamental strength and conditioning programs. They just don't exist,
Mm.
which is kind of sad. I'm also seeing a lot of kids with poor body mechanics, poor pitching mechanics. They're not getting good instructional content from their pitching coaches, or their coaches in general who coach them for their teams, respectively, whether it's their travel team or like their high school school team. And then the one thing that's really missing, I see a lot of things missing when I ask players who come in to my office, have you been on, or have you ever been on, or are you on now currently a dedicated arm care program? And usually most of the time the answer I get is, what is that? I don't even know what that is, which is concerning.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, that kind of begs a question, like, what would you say would be a good arm care program for a kid that's trying to get through this gauntlet of pitching without all the injuries?
Yeah, I mean, it's really something that's going to tackle the whole upper quarter, right? So we talk about the shoulder blade, the scapula, the glenohumeral joint where the rotator cuff lives around. And then if we're talking about preserving the UCL, the most important ligament in the elbow for a thrower is it's working on all those dynamic stabilizers that surround the elbow area. The flexor pronator group primarily. All those things go hand in hand and coincide with good mechanics, good strength and conditioning program, and being a multi-sport athlete.
Absolutely, yeah. It's yeah, one of the things that, in my program, I've got guys that, they love baseball, they love pitching, and so a lot of guys I'll have younger guys. And so we teach the knuckleball because it allows them to be able to, they're still able to compete at a high level because it's a nasty pitch, but
Love that.
yeah, it's the least taxing pitch in the arm because it's not a max effort pitch. And there's guys, they're pitching into their late 40s with it. R.A. Dickey famously won a Cy Young Award. I think he was like 38, pitching into his 40s without even having a UCL ligament. And so a big reason is because it's simply not max effort. Like you're going to be throwing at maybe 80%, something like that, plus or minus a little bit. And from what I've seen, and in my own experience of throwing, is that a lot of the injuries happen at max effort. Like if you just go below that, it doesn't necessarily negate the possibility of arm injury 100%, but it seems to me that it's like it definitely minimizes the risk a ton. So it seems like a lot of it is just that everybody's taught max effort from like a very young age, and that's just kind of the way they
Yeah.
throw. So, have you seen anything like that in your experience of like, there's like like you can throw a little bit less than max effort, you're going to be a lot better, but then once you kind of go to that top limit, there's like a limit of the ligaments and what they can handle.
Yeah, so the UCL ligament can only withstand a certain amount of forces, newton meters of force. And then after that, it literally breaks down and tears.
Mhm.
So, with that being said, everything has to kind of work in sync with one another in order to prevent that from happening. Now, if I had to make a recommendation to a youth athlete who wants to become a pitcher and develop into a thrower or pitcher later on in life at a higher level, if I had to make a recommendation, I would say get rid of the radar guns. Try not to track your speed so much. Don't worry about how fast you're throwing the ball. Worry about how it's coming out. Worry about your delivery. Worry about your location.
Mhm. Yeah, I've been posting stuff on that. There's like a number of guys that have said that. I think maybe the most famous elbow, Tommy John guy, Dr. Andrews, that's what he says, like, please just get rid of the radar guns. And that's one of the biggest things. And it's tough, man, because that's just like, people obsess over that.
They
And
do, and it's pitch after pitch after pitch. Trying to get to the one mile more per hour, two more miles per hour. I think it's doing more harm than good. Not to say there's not a place for radar guns. I think they certainly serve their purpose. If we're tracking guys velo, day to day or week to week, or if someone's coming off of an injury and we want to make sure that they're throwing a certain percentage of their max velocity. I think there's certainly a purpose for it, and it fits in rehab or it fits in baseball. But I think you and I can agree on this. At least I think we can. Is that when we take it out on a daily basis, every single pitch, you know, preemptively, if I have a kid, if I ask them to throw at 70%, they're probably going to be throwing at 80%, 90%. We ask a kid to throw full max, 95, 100%. They're going to try to throw harder than that. And that's where we start running into problems and issues. Believe it or not, fastballs are more detrimental to your elbow and your shoulder than throwing breaking balls or off speed pitches.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. The one thing like I've told kids, well, so like everybody wants to, develop to the best pitcher they can, right? That's why we're playing. And so, I've told guys, it's like, look, if you want to be throwing 95 one day and you want to make the big leagues, you think that reaching a certain velocity milestone when you're 11 or 12 is like important. But in my estimation, and you can give me your thoughts on this, if you have two players, one who focuses on their mechanics, clean throws, hitting their location, not max effort when they're younger, he will actually end up throwing harder when he's 18, 19, 20 than a guy who's, trying to blow up the radar gun when he's 10 years old. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I actually have a slide here. I'm trying to pull it up, some information that I have. Let's see if I can find it. Bear with me.
Yeah, you're good.
Where's it at? Hmm. Oh, here we go. So actually, I'm reading an article right now. It's talking about this is a 7-year study looked at mechanics of youth baseball pitchers,
Mhm.
and the changes are really most significant between the ages of 9 to 13 for kinematics. This is your motion,
Mhm.
and between the ages 13 to 15, it's more significant. The changes are more significant. They occur with the kinetics. This is where you start to increase your forces. So really what this means is that the forces start to increase once you start to get into high school age, kind of around that eighth grade, ninth grade range. And really what this article is saying is that if good mechanics are not taught by the start of high school during their puberty or skeletal maturation phase, when power starts to really increase, the potential for risk of injuring the shoulder and elbow starts to increase dramatically. So really what that says is that mechanics are paramount. They're super important to teach at the youth level. We really shouldn't be worrying about how fast we're throwing the ball. We shouldn't be worrying about the velocity. We should be worried about the mechanical structure of the throw of the pitch and how the ball is coming out, and everything looks kind of in sync with one another. Because we know that throwing a baseball is it's like timing. It's like swinging a golf. It's like swinging a golf club. Timing is like so imperative and essential. And we have one thing that's off with the timing, it's gonna just kind of unravel almost like a row of dominoes. And have that domino effect where we just have this cascade of bad things occurring.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah. I mean, at the young ages, yeah, it's just got to be, and it's tough because, I mean, I coached travel ball for a while and I got out of it because it was just, I mean, any parents listening to this are probably like, just can totally relate, but like the whole atmosphere is wild where people are like trying to cheat to win, you know, 8-year-old games. And I was just talking to a parent earlier today where he was talking about like 5U baseball and they're like kicking the pitching machine and stuff to try to cheat and stuff. And it's just like, at that age, man, you don't know which kid's going to be a big leaguer, which kid's going to be done with baseball before middle school. It's just, they need to be learning good mechanics, having fun. And honestly, that should be really up until, kind of like, high school, even, till junior, senior year, you just have no idea how you're going to develop. And so it's got to be mechanics focused, learning to pitch because, like I give the example of Ben Joyce. He was throwing 65 miles an hour his freshman year of high school. And, his parents didn't even take baseball seriously. And they just thought he just was a scrub, basically. Now he's throwing 105, right? So he actually had an advantage. Justin Verlander talks about this. He said, Verlander, we could look up the quote. He says, I literally, you know, pity the guys that are throwing 90 as freshmen because they're going to have all these arm injuries. He's like, I was fortunate that I had a slow burn with my velocity, is what he says. I wasn't throwing super hard when I was a freshman, sophomore. It happened once he was developed. And me and Verlander's pitching at like 40 years old.
Hmm.
And so it's really got to be something where we're able to raise consciousness for parents out there that they're able to understand that with these youth levels to not get caught up in this and to just learn to good mechanics, pitch, have fun, hit your spots. The knuckleball is part of that. As it's the easiest pitch on the arm, and it's a time to do it when you're younger. And then if you need to focus on velo, I say when you're 17, 18, just understand the risk, right? Because sometimes, guys are going to do it, but there's even at an older age, there's going to be risk.
Yeah, 100%. And I can actually read to you some of, and this is right out of USA Baseball recommendations, and this kind of steamrolls into what we're talking about. It's a very smooth transition here. But the number one thing that USA Baseball recommends for the youth baseball player in Little League is focus on athleticism,
Mhm.
physical fitness, and have fun. And
Yeah.
that's it, right?
Hmm.
There's other guidelines or recommendations there, but that's, in my opinion, that's the biggest one.
Hmm.
Then we have to focus on mechanics, like we talked about, um, kinematics, like the sequencing of the event of throwing a baseball, like how to pitch properly.
Hmm.
And there's also all these other recommendations that USA Baseball has as well, but those are the big ones, especially for the youth athlete, the little leaguer.
Totally. Yeah. So tell me, I'm like curious about, when your time with the Guardians, like obviously that's a little bit different. You're not a youth player. You've got to compete. That's your job. Like, what kind of stuff would you see injury wise? And then what kind of stuff would you see if you ever like if guys would change anything mechanically or maybe effort wise that would have a big effect? Like I'm genuinely kind of just curious about it. Like what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so at the pro level, you're going to see all sorts of injuries,
Mhm.
not just shoulder and elbow. We saw a lot of stuff there. I saw a lot of stuff there: low back injuries, hamstring injuries, knee injuries, neck injuries. Um, Baseball players get beat up.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the beast when it comes with the sport. But um, when it came to like shoulder and elbow injuries, I'm certainly not going to sit there and try to change the mechanics of a professional baseball player.
Yeah.
Whatever he did to kind of get to that level has worked for him over those years. So I'm certainly not going to try to change that. That's not my job. I'm going to
Mhm.
stay in my lane. That's up to the pitching coach, and the coaches around that player at that level. My job mainly in the training room working with the trainer was just to get these guys right so they can throw a baseball. So we were identifying things more like a physical therapy level,
Mhm.
making sure they had proper range of motion for a baseball player. They had proper strength. They had no swelling, no pain, proper flexibility. And psychologically, they felt comfortable enough to get back on the field and start a throwing program and get back on the mound or back in the game. So that was my job as a physio.
Totally, yeah. Did players ever talk about like, max effort was contributed to it and then maybe they dialed it down and that was, helped, or was that not even something that you guys would talk about?
Yeah, we would talk about that stuff. There's all sorts of reasons how or why, these guys would get injured. A whole array of things that could happen. And each guy was kind of different and each situation was different. It was day to day, week to week. So it really varied. It all kind of depended. Um, Maybe one guy would get hurt because of max effort. Maybe one guy would get hurt because maybe he rested too long. He might have been on the bench too long. There might have been an inning that went too too long into, while he was sitting there resting. Maybe he didn't get a proper warm-up routine in that day. Maybe it was too cold that day early on in the spring. He just couldn't get warm enough, couldn't get loose enough. Maybe he just didn't feel right going out there. So there's a lot of different variables on how injuries happen and how they occurred.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. That's like one thing I told a parent, and if he watches this, he'll probably know who he is. But he said, I had talked to him about the importance of on-ramping. Me, it's kind of the concept of like, say you take an off season off, which is great, right? Give your arm some rest, but you on ramp is, you start off gradually, you're building yourself up to where you're ready to compete.
Hmm.
And he kind of like, skipped the on ramping phase and then got hurt pretty much right away. And so, um, I think personally, I actually had an injury too where I didn't honor. It was actually during Christmas break in college, and you have 6 weeks in college, right? And so we would go back kind of in the middle and throw bullpens. And I'm a freshman, so I go back. I haven't thrown a ball in like 3 weeks, and I'm trying to impress my coach, like in a bullpen, which is meaningless, right? But I'm trying to, throw close to 100%. And then I don't know what happened, kind of like something in the shoulder, like, bicep tendon. I don't even know for sure. Maybe you would probably be able to diagnose me, but um, something happened just from that, and I wasn't able to get my velo up the whole year. It kind of went down on like 7, 8 miles an hour. But from that experience and just experience with kids, I know I preach on ramping, one of the most important things to me. So, what would you say to that as far as like, okay, you haven't thrown in a while, like how do you build yourself back up to being able to compete and throw max and throw hard as you can?
Well, it's pretty simple. We build out progressive interval throwing programs over time. So, I mean, if you've been out of throwing for a while, whether you're injured or you're resting, you haven't thrown a baseball in say 3 to 4 months, you're going to have to work yourself back into throwing shape. I mean,
Mhm.
you would think that this is common sense, but um, unfortunately, these things do happen. So for me personally, if I'm going to ramp someone back up, it's going to be a progressive interval throwing program, an ITP I call it, and it's going to be built out with proper dosaging and intensity and distances um, over the course of however long you want to build the program out for. We do these things all the time for postoperative cases, for acute injuries, chronic injuries, and then the case of shutting it down for the winter for 3 to 4 months, and then building up that athlete to get back into pitching form or throwing form before the season starts. So
Yeah.
ITPs.
Yeah, so I have kind of like a rule of thumb, but this is not to do with injuries. You could speak on that or just, give me your opinions on this, but it's like my kind of rule of thumb is like, say I'm working with a guy and he took a month off for summer or whatever. That's like pretty common. They don't take it, ton of time off, and then maybe they should take more. Say a guy takes a month off, I tell kids to take at least half of the amount of time that they took off as a period to on ramp. So you took a month off, you take 2 weeks to on ramp up before you're at your level of throwing effort that you were before. So we're not, and I see it all the time. A month off, first day back at practice, guys are ripping it. And you might not hurt yourself when you're 12 the first time, but it can happen. But if you do that, it's going to happen where you're going to get injured if you keep doing that. So I say 2 weeks, start gradual and just build up. But that's not even thinking about injury. That's just a healthy kid. He takes a month off. Give yourself a two week on ramp. What are your thoughts on time periods? Obviously, injuries are different.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, I mean, I'm probably on more the conservative side, but when I build programs, the amount of time that the athlete has been down for is the amount of time I'm going to build that program back up for. So if someone hasn't been throwing for a month, I probably would double that amount of time. Instead of 2 weeks, I usually go 4 weeks,
Yeah.
4 weeks for a throwing program. And it
Mhm.
all depends. I mean, we're talking about a first baseman, a shortstop, a third baseman, an outfielder, or a pitcher. The program's going to differentiate and vary depending on the position. And also, it's going to vary with distances and the amount of throws and the intensity based on their age too, and also their athleticism and the ability to throw.
100%. And like, yeah, parents, I want you to listen. Everyone thinks I'm like the most conservative guy out there for let's save the arm. We're listening to a guy that this is his specialty working with major league teams, and he's maybe more conservative than me. And listen, we're not trying to hinder the, career of a young athlete. We're trying to get you guys to the highest level, right? And so if you can take that period of time to on ramp, it's not going to, oh, I need to be ready by this point. No, you need to be ready when you're 18, when you're 21. That's what we're trying to get to. So if you're
Right.
wearing your arm out when you're 10, 12, 14 years old, that's only going to destroy your career. And so it's so critical um, to have that on ramp to build it up to, maybe you don't pitch that much in the fall competitively and you're working on your body, you're going to end up throwing harder than your peers that are just pitching nonstop every single game. And I mean, we're trying to help everybody, right? And I know a lot of parents because I work with people that are in this where it's like, they can't wait to just okay, now I'm cleared by the doctor. Now I've got to go pitch 3 innings and max effort. It's wild, right? So I hope parents see this. I hope kids see this and they show their parents and believe me, we're trying to get you guys to college to pros. And if you guys listen to this, you're gonna have a much better chance.
Here's a classic saying, and I say this all the time: is the juice worth the squeeze?
Mhm.
Is it worth it?
Mhm.
What's another 2, 3 weeks in
Yeah.
that 2 to 4 week throwing program, right? What's another 2 weeks,
Mhm.
especially at a youth level?
Mhm.
We have time.
Yep.
Time is one thing that we have, unless it's the game 7 of the World Series and we have to get the pitcher back. And I would
Yeah.
say even in some cases, some of the guys at the pro level don't even make it back because they want to conserve themselves for the next season, right?
Yeah.
They want to make sure that they're maintaining the longevity of their career.
Mhm.
So I always go back to the saying, is the juice worth the squeeze? And most of the time it's not.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I've seen actually some stuff where, parents will think that, you're going to come back from Tommy John stronger. And maybe there's been cases where people have. I don't even know all the literature on it, but
Yeah, it's a complete misperception.
this
I mean, it's
perception.
just
Yeah.
yeah. That's all built by the media and the general public. But you certainly don't come back stronger from a Tommy John UCL ligament reconstruction or repair.
Mhm.
Um, it's no different.
Yeah, and I probably if I asked 100 parents, I bet you most of them be, oh yeah, well TJ, yeah, if he gets TJ, like there's actually stories of um, of parents getting their kids TJ like preemptively. Have you heard about that?
I have heard of this. I've
And
Fortunately I have not seen it, but I have heard of that. But what I can tell you is that the parents and the kids come out of surgery and they come back and they think they're stronger and they're throwing harder is probably because they weren't doing an arm program before
Mhm.
they got hurt. Then they went through all this massive rehab, did all this strength training, and that's really what got them stronger after their surgery, unfortunately. But now they've gone through an arm care program, technically, and a progressive interval throwing program, which got their arm stronger. They did an arm care routine and the
Yeah,
ability to rest. They were actually resting for a long time and they
yeah,
shut down their arm for a while. So that's probably why they came back stronger.
yeah, 100%. I mean, I remember, yeah, kind of to piggyback on that when I was in the Cubs organization, it was guys like, Kerry Wood and stuff like guys that were young, just hot, starting Kerry Wood didn't have like 20 strikeouts in a game when he was like 20 years old, and his arm injuries the rest of his life. And he told us, he's like, man, when I was, your guys' age, when he was 18, 19 coming up, he's like, I thought I was invincible. I thought I could just throw as hard as I can every single pitch. I can go back in time. I'm doing all my bands. I'm doing all my arm care. I'm doing all this stuff because you don't even realize how important it is until it's too late a lot of times. And that's why it's so important to, to educate people and just to raise awareness because I feel like it can help a lot of people. And it's John
Well,
Smoltz. Let me give you an example. I heard John Smoltz, one of the top, major league. I think he's a Hall of Famer, right? John Smoltz.
yeah.
He said that, and his whole crusade right now is trying to help, people understand the arm injury epidemic. He's like, it's not right for a young player to have arm pain constantly, right? That's not normal.
No.
He said in today's game where everyone throws max effort every pitch, his arm only would have lasted 7 years, in his opinion, before it would have blown out. Like John Smoltz probably could have thrown 100 if he had to, but he's like, okay, I can throw, whatever he was throwing, 95, and he can pitch 20 years in the big leagues or however long he pitched,
Hmm.
versus, okay, I'm going to throw max effort and you're just going to blow it out over and over and over again. So it's like, if you can just pitch at 90, 95%, hit your spots, good mechanics, you're going to have a way better career than if you just try to go max effort, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Um, the fastball and max effort has been shown to be probably one of the more detrimental things for the youth athlete, and just the elbow and the shoulder in general, throwing that max effort.
Is there anything, because I know that in this year, 2025, there's some stuff where people are talking about like when they throw way over the top, there can be more injuries. And so some guys are experimenting with a lower arm slot. Do you know anything about that? Like some people are saying there's shoulder impingements if they go too high.
I know that the arm slot position can vary based on the pitcher or the thrower, but it's all relative to the trunk and how the trunk is positioned. If you take these submarine guys, and you notice that they're throwing from, way underneath. If you took them and took their trunk and kind of tilted them upright and took a look at where their arm slot is, it'd be the same as someone who kind of throws overhead, in our eyes. So I guess
Yeah.
it's all relative to the trunk position and where the hips are positioned, but I haven't seen or heard anything about that. We just
I
alluded
always
to.
tell guys it's got to be shoulder, shoulder, elbow. Like I heard basically everyone kind of throws sidearm. It's kind of like depends on, is that what you're saying? Kind of like,
Yeah, degree of tilt of your lumbar spine and thoracic spine. Like there has to be some degree of tilt for you to be in the proper arm slot position. But like I was saying before, like the submarine guy, you're going to see a massive amount of like lumbar flexion and side bending and rotation, to get into that submarine position. But if you took him and tilted him upwards, he would probably align perfectly with someone with a regular arm slot position that we see, it kind of throws overhead.
yeah, for sure. So what about, sometimes I've had people ask like, what is it about the knuckleball that, is safer on the arm? Because there's a lot of people that they don't know too much about it. And that's one of the things I try to do is educate. But you see people like Phil Niekro, Hoyt Will, and they're pitching to like they're 50. R.A. Dickey didn't even have a UCL. I know from experience that like, I was having arm injuries and I'm starting to throw the knuckleball. It's 1,000 times easier. I'm, 37 and I can still throw, totally probably healthier than I was when I was playing, to be honest. So
Yeah,
what is it about the knuckleball that makes it just so much easier on the arm?
you probably know more about that than I would, in terms of, you definitely know more about that than I do in terms of the knuckleball versus throwing a fastball, in terms of like the mechanics and the positioning. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, I just tell people that imagine, your fastball, you're at a max effort, and then imagine you're throwing 80%, which is just kind of like how much easier would it be to throw 80% all day? You could probably do that, almost every day, and you probably feel fine.
Yeah.
And so to me, in my experience, it was all about max effort. Like I could go right now and pitch in a game. I could go 100 pitches at 80%, and the next day I feel fine. If I go to a game right now and throw 20 pitches max effort, hard as I can, my arm's
You're gonna be gassed.
hanging, like,
You'll
and
be you'll be gassed.
yeah, maybe injury. So that's a
You'll be
juice
gassed.
squeeze, right? Is it worth the squeeze to get that extra, not even necessarily harder? Because when you throw max effort, sometimes it's not even harder. It's just perceived because your mechanics actually deteriorate as you try to throw harder. So you might not be throwing harder, but you're going to blow out your arm.
Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of these kids, they're throwing as hard as they can, but some can do it,
Mhm.
but you know, others can't. Some people are just designed and built to throw a baseball. Most of us probably are not. Like human anatomy, I can tell you, like we were not placed on planet Earth to throw a baseball. It's not what we were, as human beings, designed to do. But some people are more fortunate than others, and they have better mechanics, better strength, better precision, just better body awareness, better proprioception. Like they just have the better ability to throw a baseball. Um, Not everyone has that. So I guess what I'm getting at is that what are we talking about?
I was talking about like, knuckleball, you're throwing at 80% versus just max effort, just ripping pitches as hard as you possibly can.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that, most kids today like just don't have the ability to throw in general, let alone throw max effort, throw fastballs on a continuous basis day in and day out.
Yeah.
It's just, and they're lacking things. They're lacking strength, they're lacking coordination, they're lacking flexibility. I can't tell you time and time again where I do evaluations on high level pitchers, like some of the top players in our area, the county. Like we do a ton of baseball screens with the facility I work with, and a lot of these kids can't walk and chew gum at the same time.
Mhm.
How are they throwing a baseball 90, 95 miles per hour, which is one of the hardest things to do?
Yeah.
I can't understand it. You know, I just can't.
Yeah.
So eventually there's breakdown.
100%. One thing I think would be interesting to the viewers is like, Ben Joyce, like we were talking about, he was only throwing 65 as a freshman. He said, he never did any kind of like specialized arm throw, like velocity program. He said he just lifted. He just got bigger and stronger. So he just got big. He didn't do any specific lifting. He said I just basically got big, just regular bench press, squats. Did my thing. And that was my experience. I just got bigger and stronger. And that was the main thing that helped me because, and you're the expert on this stuff, but I always felt like if I'm skinny, I was like 157 my senior year of high school. If I'm doing some like specialized velocity routine, it's trying to get a 157-pound body to throw, 5 miles an hour harder than my ligaments and my muscles my can really
All
withstand,
right.
yeah, tolerate versus, and I ended up getting to like, 200 pound, 210 was my highest. I think I was in pro balls like 190-ish. So that's getting a body that can tolerate the higher velos. And that's kind of like when you look at hard throwers that don't get injured every single year. Like I think Aroldis Chapman's probably the best example of sustained velocity. He looks just, I mean, Aroldis Chapman's like a big dude, right? He is
Right.
huge, super muscular. So I
Well,
tell
look at his mechanics, though. I mean, you ever dissect and take a look at his mechanics in slow mo?
absolutely, yeah, and I show kids that all the time. He's the guy, right? Because I look at guys that are not getting injured. I want to see the
He
guys that are not getting injured.
he utilizes everything that he has, that he possesses. He utilizes it to his full advantage. I mean,
Yeah.
the one thing that strikes me and really is glaring for me when I see him pitch. I'll tell you. Maybe you tell me first what you see when he throws, and I'll tell you what I see, like that he utilizes the best when he pitches.
Yeah. So I mean, I think Aroldis Chapman, first of all, he has some freakish genetic elements to him. He's like, I don't know, 6'4", 6'5", and long levers, long arms. But I think like mechanically, he has incredible like hip shoulder separation. And so he's getting a lot of the velocity from like the stretch, like in the midsection right here, really good. Horizontal shoulder abduction, getting the arm back really well, and he's driving down the mound really well. And then also, if you look at him, when he finishes, it looks like he's throwing batting practice, where he just finishes with all the energy in his body is imparted into the baseball. So he's not like falling off or anything where it's wasted energy. Every single ounce of his energy is going into the baseball. It's all timed up perfectly, and it's like all the energy and stress is kind of distributed throughout the body. It's not like it's just an arm, it's just his whole body is into the throw.
It's synchronized, right? I mean,
Synchronized, yeah.
it's everything's synchronized and everything falls in place the way it should be. But the main thing that I see when I see him throw is stride length.
Yeah.
You want someone's stride length to be at least 90% of your height. I mean, I think he's over 100, 105% when he strides out. He gets long. And the
Yeah.
fact that he gets so long, everything kind of just rolls into place. And when you talk about his follow through, his delivery, that's probably what you're seeing. He puts himself in a very advantageous position. So, his kinematics are spot on.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think he's number one. And then the other guy too, Nolan Ryan, as far as a sustained velocity without, like a lot of injuries. I think they'd both do a lot of similar stuff with they're both, strong guys. So it's like their body can withstand it. They're not just like, skinny guys throwing, 100 plus miles an hour. Nolan Ryan was known as one of the first guys to hit the gym. One thing I'm wondering, because like the injuries are happening with like UCL, shoulder, stuff like that. Is there a way to strengthen tendons and ligaments?
Ligaments, not so much.
Huh.
Ligaments connect bone to bone, so they're primarily stabilizers. They're static stabilizers, but tendons, for sure, tendons attach to the bone and also connect to the muscle, which are dynamic stabilizers of your joint. So definitely ways to stabilize your tendons and definitely your muscles, but also to work on your range of motion to help carve out range of motion to make sure that your motion is where it should be, that you're utilizing as much motion as you possibly can. And not only like you have that motion, but can you control that motion? So we talk about like articular health and joint health.
Yeah. So how would you lift if you were trying to like, strengthen your tendons? I guess the ligaments we can't really strengthen. Is there any particular way, or is it pretty much just basically getting stronger?
Well, you want to try to put as much load through the tendon as it can tolerate. Not to enough where you're gonna, tear the tendons or irritate the tendons and cause tendonitis, but as long as you're doing things safely and effectively, the more load you can put on the area, the more that the body can kind of withstand in a controlled fashion. Remember, we want good quality over quantity. The more that you can progress the tendons in that aspect, the more you're going to help with strength and endurance and overall all around stabilization of that area.
So when I talk about lifting, one thing I talk about is like, controlled reps and then also controlling the negative part of it. So
Yeah, the
that,
eccentric part of it.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Because you see a lot of kids when they're lifting, for example, they're just like pushing up and they're kind of using their whole body. And that's not really strengthening the tendons as much as being able to just like go up slow, but then really on the way down you're controlling it so that you're going to get strength in the muscle but also in the tendon, like you're saying, supporting the weight of it. And there's actually a lot of research that shows that's the best way to gain muscle too. It's like time under tension,
correct.
stuff like that. And I
Yep.
mean, that's honestly like old school bodybuilding type stuff, which that's kind of how I grew up. They preach a lot of that stuff, time under tension and, going slower reps. And
Hmm.
a lot of the guys that are more, advanced are doing that stuff too. And so that's one of the things. I mean, I think that your body's got to withstand it. So I don't preach velo programs because it's like you can't get a body that can't withstand the velo to throw harder. That's just an injury waiting to happen. Get the body stronger, get the mechanics better. The velocity is gonna, go to where the body can tolerate.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a question for you. How did we get here with the velo programs? I'll leave with that question. And just to kind of go back, you know, a good research study that came out years ago talked about increasing velocity with a youth athlete, overhead baseball play, overhead athlete, youth athlete, especially predominantly a pitcher. But the study was they put them on a 4-week strength and conditioning program for arm care and just basic all around strength and fitness, not only for their upper body, but for their lower body too. 4-week program. Guess how much percent they increased their velocity by?
That's a good question, man. I wouldn't know the exact numbers on that.
2%.
Hmm.
2%. And then they were actually, the other part of the study was they were on a 6-week plyometric program. Plyometrics are a form of concentric and eccentric, like you alluded to before. It's more like a jumping mechanism, like a spring mechanism, but we
Yeah.
can do plyometrics for the upper body as well. They're on a 6-week plyometric program. And guess how much percentage they increase with their velocity?
How much?
2%.
Yeah.
So between a strength and conditioning program and plyometric program, we just gained 4% on our velo.
Hmm. So that's the way, is just getting stronger.
Getting stronger. Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess the question I have for you is how do we get here with these velo programs?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of feel like I know, because velo sells, right? So it's like if there's a lot of businesses making an insane amount of money, where you can have a kid that's throwing 87 and he has 3 months before he's got maybe he's going to go to a showcase and he's got to get to 90, right? You don't have time to maybe put on the strength, or maybe you do, like you're saying, where you can do the exercises. And honestly, I'm not going to say that all velo programs are the same. Some actually are just more to get stronger and they're a lot better, but then some are just hucking balls into the net as hard as you can. You've probably seen a lot of those on Instagram. And I think kind of what happened, in my opinion, is that you do throw harder doing that, but it's only later on that we see, okay, yeah, you throw harder in the short term, but then the injuries, you're just blowing out your arms. You can't.
They're piling up. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I talk about velo programs, I'm talking specifically more about weighted ball programs. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know what your experiences with those and what you've seen.
Yeah. I mean, so there's, I don't even necessarily want to call out, different companies that have been doing this, but like, I mean, I've taken some of the certifications from them, so I've like done a lot of, research, in this area, but it does seem like they work as far as gaining short-term velo, but it's just like there's also like I read a study, I can't remember exactly, but it's like, you go to a weighted ball program, you're probably on average going to gain a few miles an hour, but then it's like a third of you guys are going to get injured like, within a couple of weeks after, so it's it's not sustained velocity. You might gain it, in a very short period of time, and then there's an enormous injury risk. So actually, a lot of the companies that have been doing this have walked away from it a little bit,
Mhm.
which is good, because yeah, the studies on it, and then like just kind of the piling up of injuries have been so brutal. But I think that it wasn't necessary. It's not like it's just like, oh, let's injure as many kids as possible kind of thing. It's more,
No, yeah, no.
yeah, it's more of like, hey, we just found out that if you throw as hard as you can with a weighted ball into a wall, you'll gain velocity in 2 weeks. And it's like, yeah, that might be true. And then 5 years later, we're like, oh, dang, okay, well, that's like ruining a lot of arms. And so a lot of the, people that are doing it are not doing it anymore, but it's kind of like, it's still a segment of the training, realm out there where they're still selling it, people are still doing it because not everybody knows kind of the dangers of it, which is part of what we're talking about. But yeah, it's like there's people don't know the risk, and a lot of times you'll have a high school kid where well, first, okay, here's high school kids will sometimes do stupid things to try to get an advantage. Like, I mean, there's high school kids that are shooting up steroids, right? And then that ends up bad, right? That's a terrible idea, but it happens. So I think that people are going to throw weighted balls, people are going to do stupid stuff. So it's important to let people know what the risks are. And so, yeah,
100%. I mean, do you think weighted balls are more like a neuromuscular primer? Do you think they're actually strengthening the tendons and the muscles and preparing the joint for throwing faster? Or, in your opinion, is it kind of like a neuromuscular primer, like waking up the nervous system, um, manipulating it to throw harder, throw faster? Um, and then eventually over time, those things subside and more or less go away. But the
yeah,
damage has already been done when we put too much stress on the ligament and the tendon where it's irreversible.
I mean, that's something that I would love to hear you talk about because honestly, I've, I just like I'm afraid to even see it can do it. So maybe I don't know what the research is on it. Like I just know that I've seen too many injuries. But yeah, what is your opinion like? I don't even know what those terms mean.
Yeah, so for me personally, like weighted ball program, if I'm gonna feel comfortable and confident of a player who would
Mhm.
ask me or who's doing one or
Yeah.
thinking about doing one, a weighted ball program, I'm gonna ask them these questions. Um, I'm going to make these observations as well. Do they have full skeletal maturity?
Yeah.
So have they gone past the point of their growth plates closing? Now let me ask you a question. Like, at what age do most individuals or youth athletes, or kids, do their growth plates close?
I mean, that's why I'm on here talking to you.
Hmm.
I don't know exactly
If
when
you
that.
if you had a if you had to make a guess.
I mean, a guess, I would say, first of all, it's probably different for each athlete, but I would imagine that doesn't happen until they're like, close to full grown. So I don't know, 17, 18. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say 17, 18. But remember when I talked about before, you could totally have an eighth grader who looks like he belongs in college,
Yeah.
or a senior who looks like he's just kind of making his
Uh-huh.
way up into the ninth grade. So it depends on the kid. But
Yeah.
overall, yes, I would say this goes back to the specialization answer or question before. If I had to pick an age to start specializing in a sport where you could, around that 18, 19-year-old range, sure, I could see that. Um, but for me, if I'm going to prescribe or give the okay for a weighted ball program, the athlete has to be fully skeletally mature.
Mhm.
Now, there's a whole pyramid here that I use. It's like a series of a couple things, a criteria, I guess, if you will, for someone to be eligible to do complete or pursue a weighted ball program. The next thing is, have they had a full year of strength and conditioning, like a baseline of strength and conditioning? And
Mhm.
that doesn't just entail their arm. It's like, have they been squatting? Have they been deadlifting? Have they been sprinting and running, doing plyo box jumps, working on their core stability, their core strength? Do they have better coordination, better proprioception, better balance than they did a year ago? Do they have better strength than they did a year ago? Do they have more size than they did a year ago? And it's relative like to their BMI and their percent body fat. So that's the second thing I'm looking for. Third, I want to make sure they've done at least 1 year of a basic, fundamental, progressive arm care program. And I mean, like, are they doing rotator cuff exercises? Are they doing scapular stabilization exercises? Are they working their dynamic elbow stabilizers, their flexor pronator group? Are they training these muscles through an arm care program? That's the third thing I'm going to ask them. Fourth, right, I want to make sure that they can pass a physical screen. Do they have the available flexibility, range of motion, strength, stability? Do they psychologically feel ready to complete this program? That's the fourth thing I'm taking a look at, or I'm asking.
Huh.
So I can tell you, like, when I work in clinic, I'll do full on physical assessments of screens. And there's a lot of things that I take a look at, not just the throwing athlete's shoulder. I'll take a look at their core stability, their lower half flexibility, mobility. I take a look at their hips. I take a look at their balance. There's a whole variety of things that I'm taking into consideration when they pitch or when they throw. Now, the fifth thing I want to make sure that they're doing well is, and we talked about this before, do they have good kinetics, which lead to they have good kinematics, which leads to good kinetics. Um, so, in layman's terms, do they throw well? Do they throw efficiently enough?
Mhm.
Are they flying open? Is their arm dragging? Are they hitting their stride length? Are they collapsing on their backside foot? Is their arm in the right slot or their elbow in the right slot position when they're going through the follow through? So these things I could take a look at in like a 2D motion analysis. I don't need 3D per se. I can just use a 2D motion analysis. Something as basic as your phone works really well. Bring it down in a slow motion and make sure that they're throwing efficiently and effectively. Now, if they're doing all these things, they hit all these check boxes, and they've gone through this gauntlet of passing every single checkbox, then I feel more comfortable about them going through a weighted ball program. But there was a few and far between who really should be and are able to get to that point. But we see a lot of kids who I can tell you probably have not made it through step one or step two that are doing these weighted ball programs.